This week, you have to take some action, not on the things that you want to do, but the things that you have to do. And that's because this week we have the full moon in Aries. That is not an eclipse because the nodes may be in Aries and Libra still, but this is not an eclipse. This is a full moon and it is squaring Mars in Cancer. You don't have a choice. You absolutely have to take some action on things you don't want to do this week. But to add to the fun, we also have the sun making a square to Mars at the beginning of this week, with Venus also going opposite Uranus at the beginning of this week. Venus will make a trine to Neptune that is very freaky and kinky, and I think you can have a little bit of fun with that as well. We do have Venus going into Sagittarius right after Venus makes a sextile to Pluto. So let's go ahead and get started talking about this week. Welcome back to the Astrology Report, this time for October 14th through October 20th of 2024. My name is Cam White. If you don't know me already, I'm a professional astrologer. I've been doing this forever is what it feels like. And I like talking about the current transits of astrology and how to help you navigate them so you have a fucking kick-ass life. And if you like that type of shit, subscribe to my channel. If not, well, watch this shit anyway. Let me know what's going on for you in the comments below, because now that we're out of eclipse season, now we're getting into this winter arc of the Mars retrograde in Cancer and all of that other stuff that we've got going on. But anyway, we start this week off with the sun making a square to Mars as our highlight. And like I said last week, the sun made a square to Mars and trine Jupiter about the same time, but we do have the sun making a square to Mars really early on Monday. We then have the moon making a conjunction to Saturn in Pisces, and then our other highlight for Monday is Venus going opposite Uranus. So the biggest thing with the sun squaring Mars is don't get too defensive. You don't want to be too reactionary. You don't want to be, and also you don't want to like get your emotions hurt. Like Mars in Cancer with the sun in Libra, it's kind of like someone is going to like hurt people. That's as gay as a saying as that is, it's fucking true. And like Mars in Cancer, it's like someone's crabby and emotional and they might say something that hurts your feelings and you can, have that chip on your shoulder about it. Try not to do that. Try not to take things too personally. And I'm going to, say it's going to be hard to not take things personally, especially on Monday. However, I think you're better than that. I think you're stronger than that. And I think what's fun about this kind of transit is we get to tap into that part of ourselves a little bit more. Like, why do we take things so personally? Can we understand and have empathy that someone else is going through a struggle and that, again, we can have space for them to react and you not take it personally? Yeah, sure, it's offensive, but like, you don't need to wear it on you. You don't need to like acknowledge that, if that makes sense. So don't do that. But the moon is in Pisces and it's going to make a conjunction to Saturn. You got to have some boundaries here. And that's why I was saying it this way, because the moon's in Pisces, we're really ultra sensitive. But the moon conjoining Saturn is like, we have to have boundaries with our sensitivity. Like, for example, like, I think it's really hard sometimes to like watch social media. Like I was watching the stuff that's been happening in North Carolina, and it's like, it's hard. It's hard to watch that stuff. And it's hard to not like let that take my energy away. Not to say that they don't deserve that empathy. I can have that space for everyone that's going through that. And if you are going through that, it's fucking horrible. But like, we can be so encapsulated in everything that's going on in the world that like, it's now taking away from us, which is taking away from the world when the world probably needs you. So I look at the moon in Pisces conjoining Saturn as like having some boundaries around empathy and sensitivity, being able to know, hey, we can have the space, but have that boundary. And I think Mars in Cancer making a square to the sun in Libra is an ultimate test of that. Then Venus, while she's in Scorpio, is going to go opposite Uranus. There's some disruption with some fun, and there's things going a little bit too far. Do you know your safe word? You might need to pull it out with Venus conjoining Uranus because things might go a little bit too far. Venus in Scorpio, right? Like she's trying to have fun, but she's doing things in she's doing things in an unorthodox way in order to have fun, to have pleasure, to make connections. But opposite Uranus is going to create a lot of disruption. Like trying to think of a appropriate analogy that doesn't involve sex, because it's really hard not to. It's so hard not to with Venus and Scorpio sometimes. But Venus, what I do like about Venus and Scorpio opposite Uranus is there is an opportunity for a breakthrough. Like, for example, if like, let's say you're on the celibacy path with Venus and Scorpio, you're in this like, I want to release desire. I don't want to feel that low energy. Venus opposite Uranus might be this breakthrough in that, like, wow, I can redefine what pleasure looks like for me. I don't have to be chained and shackled by, pleasure or desire and things like that. But on the other end, if you're going on the freaky route with Venus and Scorpio opposite Uranus, there is a kind of a major disruption that can cause some sensitivity here. And so things go a little bit too far. I think Monday is a really touchy day. And I think the most important thing is the moon is in Pisces conjoining Saturn. Like, try to have some, both some empathy, but have some boundaries around that as well. And then we get to Tuesday. Tuesday is, well, we have the moon in Pisces. It's going to make that sextile to Uranus, conjoin Neptune, sextile Pluto. So we have that emotional pinball with the moon hitting all the outer planets before it moves into a new sign. We have a highlight, and that's Venus and Scorpio trining Neptune. That's some fun. And then the moon ingresses into Aries and conjoins the North Node. Okay, so Tuesday, emotional pinball. When the moon, again, I find it so interesting that all of these outer planets are at the last degrees of their zodiac signs, and the moon just makes these conjunctions to them. So the moon is technically, I mean, like you can technically say the moon is void, but is it? Because it's making all these, it's really interesting territory. And the thing I keep coming back to is all of these outer planets are about to move signs. We are in a closing chapter of a lot of major things over the past. Longest transit is going to be like 15, 16 years to the past, 13, 14 years to the past 8 years with Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. The moon making all those conjunctions is, in my opinion, just feeling really overwhelmed with like the bigger stuff in your life, like what's going on in the world, what's going on with society, what's going on with me, what is my role, and all that stuff. But let's talk a little bit about Venus trine Neptune. It's really good for fantasy stuff. It's really like Venus and Scorpio trining Neptune and Pisces is really good for fantasy, role play, getting freaky, have a little bit of fun. You know what I mean? Some of you need to loosen up. Some of you could really mend a lot of your relationships with like more fun and trust in that area. The other part of it, though, that I look at is with Venus trining Neptune while Venus is in Scorpio. My only issue is Neptune is deceitful. Neptune is illusion. Neptune is fantasy. And again, it's a trine and it's Venus. There's a lot of that that's good, but there's a lot of it too that Venus in Scorpio is like, she could be feeling some pain. Like, I'm going without this fun. I'm going without this desire. And she's trining Neptune where you can be making up stories about it. Like, for example, like you might be like, I'm not good enough and no one loves me and blah, 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 blah. And then make up this whole story about why you're not good enough and no one will ever love you. And it's just kind of like, you don't have to do that. And you making up that story is just like cementing what your subconscious believes, which is you're not worthy and blah, 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 blah. And you weren't loved as a child or your dad ignored you or whatever story you made up subconsciously. Venus and Scorpio trining Neptune can like fantasize on that and work on that story more. But that story isn't helpful, and your subconscious beliefs are the things that actually dictate your life. And I think it's going to be really important to really look at where is your subconscious going with Venus and Scorpio trining Neptune and Pisces. Like, are you making up this story as to why you can't have fun or why you can't have desire and that you're not good enough? Or is it like, hey, I'm going to lean into a little bit of like the fun side of things, the darker side of things. Let me explore what fun actually looks like. And let me explore what going without pleasure actually looks like. Again, just like I said with Venus opposite Uranus, if you're on a different path with Venus and Scorpio, there's this level of like seeing the spiritual side. It's kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? There's like a high that you get. Whether it's like, I'm not gambling. There's a specific high I'm thinking of. It's like sober high. For example, like when you go sober, there's like a cloud nine, like I just got sober. Oh my God, everything's great. That's also the level of this, like being on a cloud nine without going without pleasure. And I think that's really important too. But what's awesome too, is the moon then goes into Aries and conjoins the North Node where there's just like super big increase in energy. My biggest thing with Tuesday is try not to stay up too late. I think with the moon and Aries beginning to be a full moon conjoining the North Node, it's going to be easy to just stay up really late, get busy doing something because you're going to have a lot of energy. And I think that is really important. I think that is really good. Do whatever you want with your sleep. I could care less, but there is this like really heightened energy. Find something to put it in that is constructive. Maybe just try not to stay up too late. Then we get to Wednesday and genuinely nothing happens on Wednesday. The moon is just hanging out in Aries. It's just building up to the full moon. And the way I actually really like when there's nothing happening, because I think it gives us a time to pause and a time to like reflect and think, because we're getting ready for the full moon in Aries and this isn't an eclipse and Mars is in Cancer and it's about to enter shadow, or my bad, it has already entered shadow. I look at this as like, what you need to do. It's kind of like the green room before you go on stage. Nothing's really happening. You got your water. You got like apparently Daniel Tosh in his green room has like a scented candle. And it's like you got your water, you have your candle, you're sitting in the green room waiting. You're waiting to do something. And I look at this as this is an excellent time to really think about what you have to do. And Mars in Cancer is not fun stuff. For the majority of people, I think the only people that are going to get away with Mars in Cancer being pretty decent are going to be people with night charts and people with Mars natally retrograde. However, in my client work, it's been like, if it's like most of the time Mars retrogrades are bad unless you have like a dignified Mars in a night chart. And then if you have a dignified Mars in a night chart, it's like typically angularity matters and dignity matters. It's like for day chart people, like clean slate, like Mars is going to suck. Doesn't matter if you have it dignified or retrograde. If you have Mars retrograde in a day chart, maybe it's a little bit better, but that's kind of the whole point is like you're a day chart, Mars is going to suck. But night chart people, it's been a mixture of if your Mars has dignity And when Mars retrogrades happen, are they angular and with dignity or not? That has been the big thing that I've seen. So if you want to know if this Mars retrograde is going to be good for you, I want you to think about winter. So October, November, December of 2022. I want you to think about fall of 2020. So that would be about August, September, October, November. I want you to think about summer of 2018, like dead of summer. So June, July, August. And then I also want you to think about like spring, summer of 2016. So around May, maybe like March, April, May, maybe May, June. I think it was maybe May, June. Yeah, because May and June. Think about that time. And if those times were good or bad, I mean, again, there was like Mars dignified, Mars squared Saturn. There's a bunch of issues with that. But think about those times if you want to know more about the Mars retrograde. But we get to Thursday, and we have a ton of stuff going on Thursday. So we have the moon in Aries making a square to Mars, and then we have the full moon in Aries. So after that, so that's a highlight. Then we have Venus sextiling Pluto as a highlight. Then the moon, while it's in Aries, squares Pluto, and then moves into Taurus, and then Venus enters Sagittarius, and then we have the moon making opposition to Mercury in Scorpio. Lot of moving around on Thursday. Like Wednesday is the calm before the storm, and then Thursday is like all of a sudden shit is popping off everywhere. So biggest thing is the moon in Aries making a square to Mars in Cancer is going to be like, it's going to be a little bit of an owie. I want you to be nice to people. I want you to be nice to yourself. But I also look at the moon in Aries squaring Mars in Cancer as like, oh, this is, have you ever done something as a kid that you look back on and you're like, that was obviously a bad thing to do, but like maybe you were just like 8 years old and just needed to have that like experience of like, I just did the bad thing. I just did something wrong. Moon in Aries squaring Mars is like, you're going to get immediately shown like what you can and can't do. But then the full moon happens right after that. This is the way I look at this is like, what is happening for you? What is Mars in Cancer for you? You know, Mars in Cancer, again, this is why I do the monthly rising sign horoscopes, is so that you have a better idea of where to identify where this is going on. But the other way I look at this is like, long story short, everything changes in 20. Like if I was just sitting here being straight up real with you guys, this is what it is. Everything changes next year. And I know astrologers love to hype up like, oh, this year is going to be the great. Like most of these pop astrologers, honestly, they're just trying to get views and clicks, which like, I can't hate the player, hate the game. But the other way is like 2025 genuinely has the most amount of change that you will probably see in, you know, you don't see that much until like the 2040s, really. And so it's a while till we see this much change happening all at once. But what's interesting is we have this Mars retrograde in between it, and it's Mars fallen in Cancer. It's Mars debilitated retrograde. So it's like, I look at this as like, there's an ultimate sacrifice that has to be made before you move on to big things. And what's fun about astrology is this kind of happens no matter what. Whether you're proactive, like, and you are wanting to make changes, well, that's what's going to happen. But if you're not trying to make changes, like things are still going to happen no matter what. So I look at this as like this winter, we have to do things that are uncomfortable. Mars is energy and drive and action and fights, and it's not doing all that well. And it's going to be doing and it's going to be going retrograde. So there's this like lack of ambition. There's this lack of wanting to attack a problem. We are going to feel more defensive, and we do have to protect things in order that we need to protect rather than moving forward on the things that we want to move forward on. That's the vibe. And I look at this full moon in Aries as like illuminating what that actually looks like. So really pay attention to where Aries and Libra and Cancer is at in your chart. I'd argue probably more so Aries and Cancer, because that's going to give us a better identifying marker of what the next November's 30 days, December, January, February, March, 5 months is going to look like. And then we have Venus sextiling Pluto. A lot of power play stuff here. I think Venus and Scorpio sextiling Pluto is, I like giving people the benefit of the doubt, and I do genuinely think human beings are good, even though some people would disagree with that. I just think they've been corrupted to a lot of ways, and we've normalized corrupted behaviors. And what I would say with Venus and Scorpio sextiling Pluto is like, if you feel like reacting and doing something that you morally know is wrong, try not to do that. Because Venus and Scorpio sextiling Pluto is like, no one's looking, no one's paying attention, do it. Don't do that, because it's so crazy to me how people are so like, there's this normalization of stealing from corporations now. Like, it's like, oh, you're in Walmart, go ahead and pickpocket that. And it's like, I don't feel bad for the corporation, but it's just like, that's a wrong thing to do, but you justify the wrong thing because of who the victim is. I don't know. I think it says something. I just think that personally says something. And I think that's interesting to reflect on. And like, why do you feel like you can justify bad behavior just because the victim isn't maybe necessarily a victim, but the behavior is bad nonetheless? So I don't know. I just look at Venus and Scorpio sextiling Pluto as maybe don't tap into that. I think it's a really important thing to really look at. Like, again, how much power and influence do you have over a situation? How bad do you really want it? And I think looking into how bad you really want something else is also important too, because I look at the full moon in Aries as like, you got to take action. You can't think about it. You got to do this now. This is why I titled this weekly, you have to do this. Like, you've got to take the action. You can't think about it. Mars in Cancer is like, being a kid and you're on the diving board and you're scared to jump in and you overthink it and you overthink it. You can't overthink it. You just have to take action. The biggest way to get out of anxiety is taking decisive action immediately. It is. The more you think about it, the worse it gets, versus the quicker you do it, the less worse it is. It's like not even bad when you just do it. Like, how many times have you just jumped into a pool and then it's like for half a second it's cold, but then you're like, oh, this is really nice, versus when you just sit there and look at it, it gets worse and worse and worse, and then you talk yourself out of it. You can't do that. That's why, for example, I always thought it was really interesting how people hated on, I think it was Simone Biles, one of those Olympics. I don't remember which Olympic it was, but she was like, I don't want to do this right now. I don't feel comfortable. And everyone's like, fucking Simone Biles, blah, blah, blah. She can't do that. It's like, dude, if you're getting in your head, like the type of level of gymnast that she's at, like, no, the vibes are important. If you're too in your head, you can't do that. Like, you can fucking die. And like, you learn that in motocross. Like, when you're hitting a fat ass jump or you're going on a track, like if you get in your head, you overthink it, like you're going to fuck up. You have to be in the moment. You have to flow with it. And if that gets disconnected in any sort of way, like you can die. Like, that is an important factor. And so I look at it as, again, try not to get into your head. A lot of you might be in a situation where maybe it is important to pause. Maybe you're like, hey, whoa, I'm getting a little bit too in my head here. And rather than taking action based off of a fear, I need to pause for a second. But I think a lot of us are really just like, rather than sitting and toiling in the fear, I need to actually take action right now. But then the moon, while it's in Aries, makes a square to Pluto, then goes into Taurus. Honestly, the way I look at this is with Venus sextiling Pluto and then the moon squaring Pluto, again, there's this like, that's why I brought up the analogy I did. Venus sextiling Pluto is like, oh, I could just do it. No one's looking. But the moon in Aries squaring Pluto is like, why the fuck would I do that? But then the moon goes into Taurus. Like, you know what? Just there's something at least relaxing and calming about the moon going into Taurus right after the full moon. And then Venus goes into Sagittarius. I'm like, thank God we get something in a fire sign. Thank God we have something fun going on with Venus and Sag. Venus is like, again, she's not in detriment anymore. She's in Sagittarius. She's going to have a connection with Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of pleasure. I think Venus in Sagittarius is more of explorative. Like, again, here in Colorado, all the leaves are changing. Go for a drive. Go look at the leaves changing. Go look at the aspens. There's something about moving forward and feeling relinquished, feeling like a cloak has been, like you've disrobed a cloak of pain, or you're no longer feeling the anxiousness or the deep, dark feelings of Venus and Scorpio. And Venus and Sag is just like, hey, what's fun? What's weird? And again, a good way. But then the moon, while it's in Taurus, then goes opposite Mercury and Scorpio. You can't really let the unknown freak you out, because again, like I said, Mercury is in Scorpio. We're a little bit more focused on what's underneath the surface, what's hidden from us, darker intentions. And the moon in Taurus is like, whoa. Like we don't need to think about that at this moment. The moon in Taurus is like, hey, everything's good. Life is good. Your belly is full. We're chilled out. You don't need to stew on, anger or resentment, as no longer that you really need to. And then I do look at the moon in Taurus opposite Mercury and Scorpio. It's kind of deer in the headlights. It's kind of like, remember being a kid, laying in your bed trying to go to sleep, and you feel like there's a monster or a ghost looking at you, and so you just like get paralyzed with fear. That's also kind of the way. Like, there's a lot of idle actions going on later on Thursday evening. And so the way I look at it is, maybe it is better to just not get too deep into your head, not take a lot of action after that full moon in Aries. Like, full moon is like, I got to do this. And then the moon goes into Taurus, where it's like, okay, like, now that you've committed to it, just pause, take action. Again, for a lot of people too, that might just be like, hey, I actually need to take a pause and not take this action. I need to listen to my gut and say that this isn't the right time. Like, I think like, I've told people before, like, I identify much more with conservatives. And then like during the Olympics, people are like, Simone Biles didn't represent America. And I think they just hate her because she's black. I'm like, dude, like, if you know anything about sports, like if you're feeling weird in your gut, don't do it. It's not worth the injury. And also, she's like fucking, I know she's got like a bajillion medals. She kicks ass. Like, she's allowed to be like, nah, fuck you. Like, I'm not doing your silly Olympics. And then she came back this year and like fucking crushed it. So I look at it as like, the moon in Taurus going opposite Mercury is like an excellent time to just kind of like, you know what? I'm going to wait things out. Like, you know what? I'm going to sit here and pause and meditate. And what's hard about talking about the full moon is that it is kind of reactive. It is kind of like, damn, I need to take action right now and not be in my head. And then afterwards, the moon in Taurus is like, okay, that felt good. Like I feel a lot more calmer after it. But for a lot of people, it also might be like, whoa, I need to actually slow down and stop. And so it just really depends on who you are and what your story is at the moment. So just kind of tap into that on Thursday. And then we get to Friday. And on Friday, it's just the moon in Taurus, sextiling Saturn and Pisces. It's just about taking your time with things, honestly. Enjoying as that things are going slow. Take your time. Don't be in a rush. Relax a little bit. You don't want to be like, again, impatient. And that's really all Friday is. But then we get to Saturday, and this is looking like a fun Saturday night. Like go out on Saturday night if you want. I like it. The moon, while it's in Taurus, is going to conjoin again, Uranus. It's going to sextile Neptune. It's going to trine Pluto. Again, a lot of that emotional pinball, but it's like the moon in Taurus. Like the moon in Taurus will conjoin Uranus. So there's this like, whoa, let me try something new. And whoa, I discovered something along the way. And then the moon sextiles Neptune where it's like, whoa, well, what else does this mean? And then the moon trines Pluto where it's like, wow, this feels really good. Long story short, it's just emotional pinball for like what's the Uranus at right now? Uranus is at 26. Hold on. Let me check. I don't have what Parker is showing on the screen in front of me. So what the moon first, we're talking about Thursday. Let's look at this. Or no, we're talking about Saturday. So the moon conjoins Uranus. The moon moves about 1 degree every 2 hours. So, okay, it's for a couple hours. The moon will sextile Mars. It's then going to conjoin Uranus and then Neptune immediately and then Pluto. So for a couple hours, it's kind of like a little bit spacey and all over the place. It's one of those things where as an astrologer, I look at this as like trying to talk about the moon, making these aspects to an outer planet each time it's in an earth or a water sign is genuinely a waste of time. And it's just like big picture stuff, pretty much emotional pinball. Like, don't even worry about it. We're in on a bigger level, on a macro level. We are wrapping up a lot of things. And the way that we're wrapping it up is through the personal transits, which is like, again, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. All of this stuff is more bigger picture stuff. And again, also this is like geopolitical and all of the fucking wars that are going on. Anyway, the moon then goes into Gemini. And then the moon goes opposite Venus. Really good for stimulation and conversation. Really good with flirting. Moon in Gemini opposite Venus and Sag is like, you ever just get a bag and yap? That's the moon in Gemini opposite Venus, Sag. You're just getting a bag and yapping. I don't want you to get a bag. I don't want you to do drugs. Love yourself. But the energy is there for that. Be sober and yap. That's the other thing. I always thought it was really interesting. Like, I can yap. I mean, Parker got me a shirt for my birthday that's like, I'm like the king of yapping or certified yapper or something like that. It's just like, I don't know why people need these things to like yap. Just like be yourself, express yourself. Why are we so afraid of what people think of us? Like, cause guess what? They're going to love you or hate you regardless of what you do. So just say what you want to say. But anyway, the moon in Sag opposite Venus and the moon in Gemini opposite Venus and Sag, I think is really good for going out, having a fun time, flirting, being adventurous, taking different risks, being curious about things. I think that's what Saturday night is really good for. Okay. You know how I said you should yap? Well, on Sunday, the moon is in Gemini, squaring Saturn and then conjoining Jupiter. Too much yapping. You ever done a bag? Okay, so I understand not everyone does drugs here, but like, people who have done drugs, which I'm not recommending because there's a reason I don't do them anymore, or at least, stuff like cocaine. You ever get a bag and then it's about, you start seeing the sunrise and the birds chirp and you're like, why did I stay up this late? You're all, you're like got the lockjaw and your heart's pounding. The moon in Gemini squaring Saturn is too much yapping. Or like, have you ever like drank and had a good time and then you kind of realize you might have had just a little bit too much to drink? Not like you're all over the place like with drinking, but like you're sloppy drunk and you black out, but just enough to go like, I'm slurring my words. I sound retarded right now. That's the moon in Gemini squaring Saturn on Sunday, but then the moon conjoins Jupiter. I think the biggest thing is there's a little bit too much talking, and I think you need to have some boundaries. But I think the other part is like, for example, with the moon conjoining Jupiter is like, figure out a way to say goodbye. Figure out a way to be like, all right, how do I wrap this conversation up? For example, like, you know what? I'm here. This is what's going to happen. I think Sunday, there's this kind of like waking up groggy, like you stayed up a little bit too late, but then the moon conjoins Jupiter where it's like, okay, you ever have like a hangover day and you just need to kind of like, do your dishes, keep it low energy, plan ahead. What is the next week like? That is what Sunday is for. We get to next week. The sun is going to make a square to Pluto. Mercury is going to make a trine to Mercury trine Pluto. Hold on. That's not why did I put Mercury? Mercury doesn't trine Pluto. Mercury trine Saturn next week. Okay, sorry, Parker. Mercury trine Saturn next week. And then the sun ingresses into Scorpio and then Mars sextile Uranus. Next week is pretty chill. I just really like the sun going into Scorpio. I think the sun, Venus is no longer debilitated and the sun will no longer be debilitated. We're starting to get a little bit more energy and power, and we're really going to feel that once we get to like November too. But next week is a lot more chill, and I think next week is like getting out of this. We've been in like the past 2 or 3 weeks like in a really weird everything's debilitated and there's no dignity going on, and that really goes away next week. So with that being said, make sure you guys like this video. It does support my channel. Let me know what's going on for you in the comments below, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.